Hi everyone, I'm Rincey and this is Rincey Reads. Today I'm going to be doing my October reading wrap up. October was a pretty good reading month for me. I focused on books on my own, like physical TBR, and if you watched my goals for the end of the year, you know that's like a high priority for me, and I'm really glad that I was able to knock out some of the books on my physical TBR. So before I jump into the books that I read, I'm actually going to talk about two books that I DNF'd, one of which I'm not sure is an official DNF just yet, and I would like your opinions on them. But I'm talking about these because I made a list of like books I want to read, which are specifically the oldest books on my physical TBR, and I figured I could like give a little bit of an update on that. So first up, I have Billy by Anna Gavalda, and this was translated from translated from the French by Jennifer Rappaport. I was sent this by Europa, and I don't know, I just started it and I was immediately just like noped out of it. You are following these two people, a man and a woman, who are hiking partners, and the man ends up getting injured. And so it starts with him like basically, on the ground, injured and things like that. And they're kind of like in the middle of the forest somewhere. And she's like unsure of like what she wants to do, like if she's going to stay with him, if she's going to try to venture out on her own, try to find help, all these different things, and she's like debating it. And like within the first couple of pages, there's just like really not graphic, but just sort of like what felt to me like explicit descriptions of like sex and things like that. And I was like, this feels unnecessary. So it kind of like immediately turned me off, and I wasn't really getting into the book in general. And then I like looked it up on Goodreads, and like no one that I knew really loved it. I didn't really see anyone who really loved it, and I was just like, I didn't buy this book. It was sent to me, so I don't feel bad at all about like just, not giving it a good try. It's also not very long, and I was just like, I'm not feeling it, so I'm just not gonna keep going with it. The other book that I read that I'm not sure what I want to do with, so if you have any opinions on this book, please let me know, is Paradise by Toni Morrison. So this is a book that I started, I think, like halfway through the month. It's not that it's bad, but it's definitely difficult to read. I even got the audiobook of it to like just help me consume it because I felt like I was getting really tangled in the words. And also like Toni Morrison's books are like beautifully written, so like I really enjoy the audiobook experience of it because she always narrates it herself, or I don't know if she always does it, but the ones that I've picked up she's been narrating, and so she like has like a cadence to her writing and things like that. So I always find the audiobook experience really helpful. The reason why I'm not like super in love with this book is just because like every chapter follows a different person, and you're basically following all these different people who live in or like have experience with the specific town. The difficult thing is that one, it's hard to like follow all this. It's an extremely large cast of characters. Like every chapter has a large cast of characters, and every chapter is like a different large cast of characters. And then there's no like clear timeline that you're following, so it's hard to orient yourself and orient these stories against each other. So I got maybe like a third of the way through, and I was just like, I don't know if I really want to keep going with this. And I like Googled this one as well, and like there's like even like information out there about how like when it was first released, the general public was not a big fan of it because it is a more difficult book. And that's not to say like this isn't worth reading, but I'm like partially curious of other people's opinion who have read Toni Morrison and have read this book in particular, of how you felt about this book. Still gonna hold on to it. I still have the audiobook of it, so I could potentially still work my way through this book, but I was just like, I can pick up something else and potentially enjoy that a lot more. And this is just not my favorite from Toni Morrison. Like, again, each individual chapter can be an enjoyable experience in and of itself, but it's like you are working. Toni Morrison is making you as a reader work for what is happening in this story, and I honestly just don't know if I have it in me right now to do that much work for a book, which is like, I feel like more on me than the book, but I don't know. Anyways, let me know your opinions if you've read Paradise or tried to read Paradise or anything along those lines, what your feelings were of this book, and if you feel like, especially if you're someone who really loved it, love to hear from you. Or if you didn't really love it, I would love to hear that opinion as well. All right, so on to the book that I have actually finished. First up, I have The Honjin Murders by Seishi Yokomizo, and this was translated by Louise Kawai. This is a locked room mystery book, and this is a book that was originally, I think, written and published in the 1930s and then has been recently republished in English by Pushkin Vertigo. So I'm not going to provide too much information about this book because, again, it's a relatively short story, but you are following basically this family. They are a very prominent family in this specific town, and the son is getting married. And so on the wedding day, it's either the wedding day or the day after the wedding, the bride and the groom are found dead in their room. And so it's basically a locked room mystery because, like, when the bodies are found, the doors and windows and everything are all shut and closed. So it becomes a mystery of, like, both who did it and the why behind why they were killed, and as well as how the murderer was able to escape and get out of the room without, like, anyone noticing. Like, it snowed and there were no footprints around the house or anything like that. So it's like sort of this mystery of, like, okay, someone murdered this couple. How did they get in? Also, how did they get out without, like, opening up anything and leaving no trace behind and things like that. This is a classic mystery. I found it to be really compelling. I definitely did not see the ending coming. I definitely thought there were lots of really good red herrings. It feels like a good classic mystery. There is, like, some level of, like, meta-ness to this because the person who is narrating the story is basically a person who also loves mysteries. And so they, like, reference other mysteries, and they're not mysteries that I necessarily know, so maybe they're made up, but I feel like they're real. And so there's some level of, like, meta-ness where, like, the person who's solving the mystery knows that this is a locked room mystery and things along those lines. So I feel like if you're someone who reads a lot of mysteries, you might enjoy that aspect of it. I think that if you're someone who, again, just really enjoys, like, classic whodunits, this is a really fun one worth picking up, especially if you are someone who likes locked room mysteries. I honestly think this is one of the better ones I've read. And yeah, there's a reason why it's a classic. So this was a really enjoyable experience for me as someone who enjoys mysteries and enjoys, like, especially classic whodunits. And as someone who is always genuinely surprised when they don't see, like, the ending coming, this was that for me. So yeah, this was really enjoyable. If you're someone who, again, enjoys classic whodunits, this is worth picking up. All right, next up I have Velvet Was the Night by Silvia Moreno-Garcia. This is a book that I was really excited to check out because Silvia Moreno-Garcia, if you aren't aware, writes in a bunch of different, like, genres and styles and things like that. And so this one was basically like a noir mystery. And I'm like, oh, that is totally up my alley. I think I'm going to enjoy this one a lot. And you know what? I did. So this book takes place in 1970s Mexico. You are following this young woman named Mate. She's, like, in her 20s. She's single. She's living on her own, which, considering the time period, is not super common. She works as a secretary and she's not really happy with, like, her job or her life or anything along those lines. She reads, like, these romance novels basically and, like, comics and things like that, and she, like, really enjoys listening to music and records. And one of the things that she does on the side is basically looks after the pets of her neighbors in her apartment building when they, like, go out of town and things like that. So at the beginning of the story, one of her neighbors across the way asks her to take care of her cat while she's out of town for a couple of days, and she gives Mate, like, a timeline of, like, when she'll be back and things like that. But the woman doesn't return in the time that she said she would, and so Mate eventually gets a hold of her, and this woman basically says something has happened and to bring, like, the cat and a certain box of stuff to her at a different location, but that doesn't turn out as expected as well. And so now Mate is sort of trying to figure out what happened to this woman and where she is, and partially because she needs to get her money and get paid, but also, like, she has this cat, and part of her is kind of intrigued about what exactly is happening. So that's one point of view in this book. The other point of view takes place from this person who works as, like, a gangster, and he's hired by this, like, shadowy boss figure almost to find this missing neighbor as well. And so you are following these two points of views as they are trying to put together the pieces of who this woman is and who she knows and where she could potentially be hiding and what she's up to. There's a lot of information going on in here that Silvia Moreno-Garcia purposefully puts in about, like, sort of Mexico during this time period. There's a lot in here about music. One of the characters calls himself Elvis because he really enjoys Elvis, and that's something that both of the characters have in common. And so I found this to be, like, a book kind of almost perfectly made for me. It is more of a slow burn mystery, I suppose, but that's sort of the nature of noir mysteries if you aren't aware. And it has these wonderful historical fiction aspects of it. I found both of the characters to be really compelling and both of the point of views to be really compelling. And you know that like these two characters are both looking for the same person, so the paths are going to cross at some point. And so it's fun to see sort of how these two people are going about searching for this woman and trying to figure out like when and how their paths are going to cross with each other and how that's going to turn out. You know, there's a lot going on in here with like people getting beaten up and hitmen and things along those lines. So it's not like a safe situation by any means. And you're not really sure who exactly you can and can't trust. And there's definitely some situations that happen in here where like there are characters that you think are on the quote unquote good side that aren't and things like that. So there are lots of fun twists and turns in here. I honestly thought it was really fun. If you've read mostly like Silvia Moreno-Garcia's like fantasy books, this will feel very different. But as someone who really enjoys noir mysteries, this one was totally up my alley. So yeah, I really enjoyed this one a lot. Personally, this is probably up there as one of my favorites that she's written. Like Signal to Noise will always be my all-time favorite Silvia Moreno-Garcia book. That one is literally perfect to me. I think that this one is like a very close like second or third place for me because it just like hits a lot of things that I really enjoy and fits into a genre that I really enjoy. So yeah, I'm really glad I picked this one up. And again, if you're someone who enjoys noir mysteries, this is definitely a good one to add to your list, or historical mysteries in general. The next book I finished is The Stationery Shop by Marjan Kamali. This is a historical fiction book as well, and it's one that's like has this extremely beautiful cover. I don't have the physical copy with me because I immediately lent it out to a friend who I thought would enjoy it, and so it has like this really beautiful cover. And so I've basically had my eye on this book since it came out because I kept seeing it in bookshops and being like, this looks so pretty. I want to read it just because of the cover. And then eventually I like looked up reviews and it had really high ratings on Goodreads, and I was like, okay, I definitely have to get it. So I recently purchased a copy of it and then read it pretty quickly. So the story begins with this character in 2013. Her name is Roya, and she's living in the United States, and she's married to this white man named Walter, and they have been together for a number of years. And she finds out that there is this man in a nursing home nearby her who she knew back in Tehran, and they were actually in love with each other as teenagers and were supposed to get married. And you found out that there was like this one day where they were supposed to meet in a square and run off together, but he didn't show up. And so she's going to go find out like what happened that day, basically. And then you flash back to 1950s Tehran and you see them sort of meeting each other for the very first time. They meet in this stationery shop in Tehran. She really loves like reading and poetry, and she's really into reading all of these English books, or Western books, I should say, that are getting translated into Farsi so she can read them and things like that. And you see their first encounters with each other and how they slowly fall in love and their stories and the stories of their family. But at the same time, there are all these revolutions that are taking place in Tehran. There's a lot of like political upheaval and things like that. So there's a lot of instability during this time period. And so you're not really sure like where things are going to go. And so you see what happened in 2013 and you see where they started in the 1950s, and you start to slowly see how the pieces get put together in this puzzle of how this woman ended up moving to the United States and what exactly happened to both of them over the course of their lifetime. This book is like super beautiful, really romantic. If you want something that like just really pulls at your heartstrings, this is definitely one. I found the characters to be extremely compelling. I found learning more about what life was like in Tehran during this time period to be really fascinating. It's a really bittersweet book because you know that like in the end they're not going to end up together, but you still like care so much about them, and you can feel like how much these two characters care about each other. And there's a lot of like these little mysteries of like what exactly is going on and what exactly is happening, and even just like parts of it that don't get answered until the very end. But honestly, like I found it so moving. Like I almost started crying during certain points in this book. I just think it's really beautiful. So if you want something that sort of like moves your heart, which I feel like I haven't read a book like that in a really long time, this is definitely one worth picking up. And I definitely think that this book is going to be like sort of on my all-time favorites of the year list because it was just like really beautiful, really moving. I completely just like fell into this world and this time period and wanted to know as much as possible about these characters and their story. All right, and the final book that I read in the month of October is Emergency Contact by Mary H.K. Choi. So this is a book that has also been on my radar for a very long time because it's a pretty popular book, especially here on BookTube. And also this cover is amazing. And it's one of those books that I feel like has like very divisive reviews on it. Like I know some people who really, really enjoyed it, and I know some people who really, really did not. And they were like, I don't understand why these people enjoy it so much. And so I was just like, I want to give this book a chance. And then when I was at Powell's in September, this was on basically like they're on sale. So it was like $5. And so I was like, you know what? I'm going to give this book a chance. So in this story, you are following these two characters named Penny and Sam. Penny is starting her freshman year at a university in Austin, Texas. She is of Korean descent. Basically, like by her senior year, she doesn't have any friends because like the one friend that she had ended up moving away and she didn't really like talk to anyone else in her high school. So she's really excited at the opportunity to start over. She also has like a complicated / strained relationship with her mother, and so she's excited to be able to move away a little bit. I mean, it's still a college in her town, but you know, she's away from home and things like that, and to kind of like get started. And then the other point of view is this character named Sam, who is in his early 20s, like I think he's like 2021, and he is extremely poor. He grew up poor. His mother ended up marrying someone, so he ended up basically becoming like the uncle of Penny's current roommate. He works at a coffee shop in town and like lives at the apartment above the coffee shop because the guy who runs who owns the coffee shop lets him do all that rent free. Penny ends up meeting Sam one day when her and her roommate and her roommate's best friend all go there so they can meet Sam. And immediately like Penny realizes that, hey, this is a very attractive guy and things along those lines. Sam's life is kind of a mess because he's in love with this woman who he had like an extremely toxic relationship with, and one day she tells him that like she's pregnant, and so he's dealing with like the stress of all of that stuff, and he basically has like a panic attack. Penny ends up finding him while he's in the midst of having a panic attack, and so she like ends up calling an ambulance and taking him to an urgent care place and making sure that like he's pretty much okay and things like that. And so Penny basically tells him like, hey, add my number to your phone so you know I can make sure that you're okay and things like that. And so he adds her as basically like an emergency contact, and so they start texting each other and creating this friendship / something more than friendship because they're just texting, but they're sharing quite a bit with each other. And so you just follow them as they like continue on with their lives and try to figure out what the heck they're doing. So I had a really complicated experience with this book because there were parts of it that I really enjoyed and there were parts of it that I absolutely hated. There's lots of things in this book that also just like really confused me, and I couldn't really understand the choices that these characters were making. Honestly, I feel like Sam's character is pretty well developed and you understand like sort of what's going on with him and where he's coming from. Penny I found to be really confusing, and I don't know if it's just like the 18-year-old angst and like figuring out who you are aspect of it, where it's just like I can't relate as much to it, but there were just like other things that just didn't make sense. Like I didn't completely understand what was going on with her and her mom, because in the beginning of the story they established that like Penny's has like a hot mom or whatever, and her dad left them a long time ago. Penny sees that like her mom is like constantly flirting with people and things like that in her eyes, and she finds that really obnoxious, which like I get that, but she seems to be like irrationally angry at her mom. And you find out like some other things that have happened in Penny's life. You can tell like she like low-key blames her mom for some of it, but like the way things continue on with her mom and that whole relationship later on in the book, like I didn't really understand because Penny just seems so like hot and cold with her mom. I could never tell like how Penny was going to react to anything, which again, like some of it makes sense because like you do see Penny's mom being like irresponsible and being like a cool mom and whatever in a way that's like obnoxious for a kid to have. And so Penny talks about how she feels like she has had to like be responsible for her mom to a certain degree since she was a young kid. And like they talk about it a little bit, but it doesn't completely make sense to me. I think the relationship between Penny and Sam is really cute and well developed. Like you see their friendship grow and you see them get comfortable with each other and start to share like these big things with each other, and that was really enjoyable. But Penny as a character was just like sort of all over the place for me. Penny is also like an English major, and so you see a lot of like her talking about writing this book and all of this stuff. I don't know, it didn't feel like necessary to the plot. to a certain degree. I don't know. I think I was just like less interested in that aspect of it. Like there's Penny wants to be a writer, and so you see her taking like this creative writing class and she's working through this novel that she's working on. And then there's Sam wants to be like a documentarian or something, and so you see him start to work on a documentary, which personally didn't sound very interesting to me. And all this stuff, and it just feels like nothing really feels very resolved by the end of the book. Like it just feels like steps were made, and I know that's how real life is, but I don't know, it just feels like there was a lot of setup and a lot of things that were brought up in this book, and then they just kind of like exist, and I wasn't really super satisfied by it. But honestly, like the relationship between Penny and Sam, I really enjoyed, and I loved reading their texts back and forth from each other and seeing how they reacted to each other. This was a weird reading experience for me, and I honestly have no idea what am going to rate it on Goodreads, because I'm just like, parts of it were great, parts of it were not great for me. I didn't hate it enough to like give up on it, so that's something. And also I'm like intrigued enough to want to keep reading more books by this author, but I'll probably get them from the library because, you know, that's the smarter way to do things. But yeah, this was like a real mixed bag for me, so I can't necessarily recommend it to people, but I can't like not recommend it to people either. Like I completely understand why some people would have loved it, but the character development just felt really weird in my opinion, and so that always just throws me off. So mixed bag of an experience, but I'm glad that I finally read it. All right, so that is everything I have for you all this week. I'm very excited that I have knocked out lots of books off my physical TBR this month. I think I only have 4 books left on my oldest books TBR, including Anna Karenina and Anna K, which are not like super high priority for me, so I'm so excited about that. Or no, I have 5 books left. I'm very excited about all of that, especially heading into November for Nonfiction November and all that stuff. I really do want to be reading a decent amount of nonfiction, but I also don't want to like ignore the other books. But if you watch my Nonfiction November TBR, you know that like all of those books are basically books that I own. So no matter what, I'll probably be making some progress on my physical TBR, which is very exciting for me. So yeah, let me know down in the comments below if you read any of these books, what your thoughts were on them. Also, as a reminder, if you've read Paradise, let me know down below what you thought of that book, because I need some opinions about whether or not I should keep going with it. Otherwise, feel free to let me know down in the comments what books you read this month that you really enjoyed, because, you know, I love hearing about books that people loved. So yeah, that's all I have for now, and thanks for watching.